It's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation, and I've got my mate, John the Music Nut. How's it going?
I'm doing great, Peter. How about you?
Not too bad at all. Today we're going to do a show about artists that are much bigger outside their homeland. So you might have a band that comes from Australia or from UK or from the US, not so big in their homeland, or they didn't have the hits in the homeland, bigger overseas. Going to do 5, pick a signature album, go round robin. John, take it away with your first selection.
Thank you, Peter. It's so great to be here. And my first one is from the UK, and I'm going to say a few things, and my mates will know exactly what I'm talking about. They were a supergroup. The remnants from Free, King Crimson, and Mott the Hoople, none other than the mighty Bad Company.
Right. Okay.
Now, they brought in Boz Burrell from King Crimson, a progressive band, but Bad Company were not progressive at all. They were just a great meat and potatoes rock and roll band.
Yeah.
And their debut nearly plays like a greatest hits album. You had 5 songs on here that hit radio and were back in the prime of your album-oriented rock stations. You heard Rock Steady, Ready for Love, Seagull. The big hits were Can't Get Enough.
Yep.
And the title track and Moving On. But their success was much more in the United States than from their homeland, the UK. They had, and I'm going to be reading a little bit here, so
that's all right.
So you feel for thanks for letting me do that. They had 4 top 10 albums in the US, and they also had 4 top 10 albums in the UK.
Yep.
However, they had 9 gold albums in the US and 7 gold albums in the UK. Now, they never had an album go past gold in the UK. However, this baby gave you 5 times platinum in the United States. They had 5 times platinum with their self-titled debut. They had 3 times platinum with their second album, Straight Shooter. Their greatest hits album is also done it's called 10 from 6, but it should really be called 10 from 5 because there's nothing from the Burning Sky album on it. That's also gone platinum twice. They've had furthermore with Bad Company, when they came back after they broke up with Brian Howe on lead vocals, they didn't do anything in the UK, but they did 1 platinum and 2 more gold albums in the United States, and they also wound up having 2 more top 40 hits with If You Needed Somebody and Walk Through Fire. And some of their other great songs, Shooting Star,
yep,
Feel Like Making Love, Burning Sky, Rock and Roll Fantasy. Yes, they had their success in the UK, but in the US it was bigger and more prolonged. So it was my first choice, Bad Company, and I'll Never Die.
That's a good pick. That's the only Bad Company album I have. To me, it's like their greatest hits. It's all, if you are a Train Spotter fan, that's the album to get. And it didn't really hurt that they were on the Swan label, Led Zeppelin's label. So I think they got a huge boost commercially or sales-wise being on that label in the States. So no, that's a stellar pick.
Thank you.
All right. Well, my pick, I'm going to do a little bit of a who am I. I'm a female artist. I was born in 1950 in Detroit, Michigan, USA. I am an American singer, bass player, songwriter, and actress. Any ideas? I'll give you a little bit further. I was in an all-girl garage group in the late 60s called the Pleasure Seekers. I had a run of hits in the UK, not so many in the US, and a run of hits in Australia. I had a guest spot in a very famous sitcom in America called Happy Days between the years 77 to 79, playing a character, Levitas Cordero.
Well,
talking about, do you know?
Yes, I do, because I loved Happy Days back in the day. I still love to watch Happy Days. You're talking about the great Suzi Quatro.
Suzi Quatro, and her first album, Suzi Quatro, the debut in 1973. Well, this is a case study for an artist that was, born in America, went over to the UK in 1972 and became a superstar. She had 3 number ones, but in America, not so hot. So this album alone, it charted in Australia. Australia was a huge market. This went to number 5 in Australia, went to number 32 in the UK, but it was the singles. And she was a bit of a singles artist. Can the Can went to number 1. 48 Crash went to number 3. And she had another number 1 hit in the UK, Will Devagate Drive. How would I describe her music? It's powerful. It's aggressive. She's got this real banshee, in-your-face vocals. She's an inspiration for a lot of female artists. There was a recent documentary that was put out called Suzi Q. Check it out. And you have various people like Deborah Harry, Chrissy Hine from The Pretenders, Tina from Talking Heads saying she was the shining light. And it really it's a bit of a grievance with me with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Here we go. Yeah. Where they sort of put Joan Jett, the Go-Go's, Deborah Harry, and rightly so. They've been inducted, but Suzi Quatro gets ignored. And it's simply because she didn't really chart in America until the mid-70s. She did a duet called Stumbling In with Chris from Smokey. And that went top 5. And that was nothing like her sonics. It was a very easy listening country sort of song that would have been played in all the Nashville stations, and it was a huge crossover hit. And it was around the time that she had that sort of recognition with being on Happy Days. But she's a triple threat. She can sing, she can act. She's written a musical. She's a presenter. She actually lives to the UK this very day. She still tours. As I said, Australia was a huge place for her to play. In the 70s, Australian rock was very pub rock, what we call pub rock, a lot of boogie, in your face. And she sort of fit into that sort of wheelhouse completely. And we took her to our heart. And in the UK, she was more of that glam scene. So she was lumped in with bands like The Sweet, Slade, Mud, T-Rex, and she fitted in. But absolute dynamo. This album is killer. It's I played it last night. So if you love that garage rock, that glam rock, that in your face, it's punchy and it's hooky. The songs were written by Mike Chapman and Nicky Chin. Dynamo. And Mike Chapman is the guy behind Blondie, producer extraordinaire, and also The Knack. Look at his sort of credentials. You'll see that he's had his fingertips on all the greats of the 70s and the early 80s. Look, she had a lot of good people behind her in the band, but, the early 70s, that was her sweet spot. And Suzi Quatro, check it out, the debut from 1973. It's killer. And she should have got more recognition in the States, but didn't. It only charted 56. One more thing I want to say. She does a version of All Shook Up. And Elvis wrote to her and said it was the best version of that song that he's ever heard. So the King, he, that's some kudos there. Anyway, Suzi Quatro.
Fantastic choice. And can you get more validation than that? Her version of All Shook Up is killer. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And And that's how I found Suzi Quatro, was from Happy Days. She did all shook up on an episode of Happy Days. That's when I first heard it in Devil Gate Drive.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah. And she did. Yeah, I wish she had a bigger role on that show. I mean, she was only on a few episodes.
7. Only on 7 episodes, but memorable.
Absolutely.
I mean, if she was walking down the street in America, people would just go, "Hey, Lever."
Yes, they would.
They wouldn't sort of think of, "Oh, that's Suzi Quatro, the rocker." They would think of that role. So 7 episodes, and yeah, it's iconic.
And it was right when Happy Days was the #1 show in the United States, when she was on there too.
Absolutely. Before they jumped the shark, or
absolutely
Fonzie did.
Exactly. Yeah. Excellent choice. Yeah, deserved way more love in the United States than she got.
Absolutely. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's really, they've got to give themselves a stiff uppercut, using your boxing terms, because
yes, sir.
Frankly, it's not the American Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Rock and roll is universal. Exactly. And you've got artists like Suzi Quatro and Kate Bush and numerous others that may have been cult artists in America, but their influence was quite, widespread. So.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Excellent choice.
No worries. What have you got for me, mate?
All right. Well, this is going to go out to our friend of ours on the Contrarians, Mr. Nick Squire. He doesn't know that I said that, but I think of Nick Squire now, and I think of this artist that I really like a lot. And he came of age in a band where he was the guitar player, and they had a huge worldwide hit, which you'll know when I say it, Whiter Shade of Pale. And then he went solo. He formed a trio, and he is from the UK. He's still making albums today. And I'm talking about Robin Trower.
Okay.
Robin Trower is from the UK. He never had any of his albums certified in the UK. He did have 2 that hit top 40. This is his big album. This is Bridges Size. This is one of those albums that it's the go-to album, and it's the one that the fans will all tell you is the best. Well, most will tell you it's the best one. Some might go with For Earth Below. But he had 5 gold albums in a row in the United States in the 70s. He had some great album-oriented rock hits like the title track, "The Bridge of Sighs," and "Two Rolling Stone," Gonna be Suspicious. A lot of great songs. Those first 5 albums, from Twice Removed from Yesterday right through Long Misty Days, are wonderful. He made a live album in 76 called Robin Trower Live, which is wonderful. One of those great live albums that should have been a double. It's 6 songs, like 40 minutes, but I mean, it's so great, and then it's over, right? But in the United States, he's still, when he's touring, like he hasn't been touring too much between COVID and the health issues that he's had. He's 77 years old now, but he's still making albums. He made an album this year.
Yeah.
And his albums are still pretty solid, but his 70s stuff is top notch.
Yeah.
It's my number 2 pick. The reason I'm going to go, why I would mention Nick, their original trio was Robin Trower on guitar, Reg Isidore, and later it was Bill Lorden on drums. And their singer was James Dewar. To me, he's Paul Rodgers with a bass guitar. He sings like Paul Rodgers. He's
got that tonality.
Exactly. He's got that same voice. He's one of my favorite singers. I just love the way he sings. He's no longer with us, but what a wonderful talent he was. And all the great albums that Robin has, that they had Jimmy Dewar on the bass and vocals. But what a wonderful talent. What wonderful bass player too. So that trio was spectacular. And Nick is a very big fan of Jimmy Dewar as well. And that's my number 2 pick, Robin Trower.
Oh, that's a good pick. Another album that I've only got one of, and I've got the live album, which is killer. So I recommend if anyone needs to dive into the discography, get the live album. You see him in his full flight.
Absolutely.
That's a good one. All righty. My next pick was a rock band that were founded in London in 1979. And it's a prime example where through their discography or throughout their career, they couldn't get arrested in the UK. But in America, they had a hit album and a hit single and had a much bigger career. And I am talking about the band The Fixx. So the big hit off this was One Thing That Leads to Another. It's a very catchy melodic song. How would I describe this band? They're new wave, they're hooky. The singer, Cy Cernan, sounds a little bit like Thomas Dolby, but there's a little bit of a Jack Hughes feel about him, Jack Hughes from Wang Chung. So yes, if you're thinking of the vocal timbre, I hear a lot of Thomas Dolby and I hear a lot of Jack. The band's really tight. I've seen clips of them on YouTube. They're still going to this day. They're very funky, tight. You know, on this album, which I really recommend, there's a lot of spiky rhythms. There's even a little bit of reggae. It's out of the box. It's not a 4 on the floor, very square, conventional new wave album. You can see that they're really pushing the musical boundaries, and I can understand why this was an uber hit in the States. Off the One Thing Leads to Another. As a band, they've been on a ton of soundtracks. Look at their Wikipedia on the discography. Just to name a few, they were on Streets of Fire, and that's when I first were familiar with them. What's this band? The Fixx. Okay, need to discover this. They were on the Desperately Seeking Susan soundtrack. They were on Fledge. They were on Gone Girl. It's huge. So they're like a soundtrack band, but this was the sweet spot. This is the album that really pushed them over the edge commercially in America. But in the UK, as I said, did nothing. And that is a perfect case study of a band that bigger over the homeland. What do you think of the Fixx?
I like the Fixx a lot, and they're still a killer live band. I saw them last year up at Tupelo Music Hall up in Derry, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And they still have the same band that played on that album, Reach the Beach. They replaced the bass player during the sessions for that, and it's the same band.
Right.
I'm sorry.
So you've got Jamie West Oram on guitar. You got Adam Woods on drums and Alfie Agius on bass. Well, there you go. That's great. But look, hey, you know, they didn't chart out over here. As I said, didn't know much about them, but I was watching some live clips on YouTube and they look really good, really tight. And you can see that they've got that chemistry, and you can tell a band that has played for a long time. They're just super tight and they're in the pocket, and they were really good. But yeah, check this album out. It's really solid.
Fantastic choice. And as Peter said, that is the sweet spot, but in the rights of 91 in the United States, they had a hit off every album. Maybe it wasn't a top 40 hit, but it was very big on album-oriented rock radio. Like from Phantoms, you had Are We Ourselves? They had Secret Separation from their next album, which escapes me right now, but that they had Driven Out from Call 'Em Animals. That was in the #1 AOR hit. And even on their album from 91, they had How Much Is Enough, which nearly charted in the top 40 as well. They have a very good catalog.
Absolutely, but they're not I wouldn't say they're AOR. They've got a little bit of edge. There's a little bit of edge that's beyond that sort of really commercial and shiny. There's some really strong songwriting. So, yeah, check it out.
Absolutely.
All right, mate. What's your next one?
All right. Well, now I'm going to go with an artist who was born in Australia and he grew up in the UK. In the UK, he was popular, but in the US for about a 3-year period, he was huge. And his brothers were much bigger.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Andy Gibb. Andy Gibb. He came into his own during the Bee Gees' prime. Well, the Bee Gees' prime in the United States, they were popular in the 60s, but beginning with the Main Course album in 75 and going into the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack and then going into Spirits Having Flown, they were huge. They had several #1 hits. And Andy Gibb was much younger than the other Maurice, Robin, and Barry Gibb. He went out on his own. And some of the songs he co-wrote with Barry, some of them he wrote on his own. He was huge in the US. His first album had 2 #1s, and Love is Thicker Than Water and I Just Want to Be Your Everything. And his next album, Shadow Dancing, had his biggest hit, which was the title track, and Our Love Don't Ever Let It Go Away and Everlasting Love. They were both in the top 10. Just to give you some numbers here. In the UK, Shadow Dancing was their only album to certify, and it went silver. In the US, in Australia, I don't believe he certified at all with any of his albums. In the US, he had 2 albums go platinum with Flowing Rivers and Shadow Dancing. The 3rd album, After Dark, went gold. As far as the singles go, he had in the UK, 1 top 10, 3 top 40s. He had a #1 single in Australia with I Just Want to Be Your Everything and 2 more top 20s. US, 3 #1s, 3 more top 10s, 9 top 40 total.
Wow. Yeah. Describe that album. What's sonically the one that you were holding up?
Okay, now with Andy Gibb, to me, the greatest hits is all you need. And you're probably wondering, why do I own an Andy Gibb album? Well, I'll tell you. Back in the 90s, VH1 in the United States, a channel called VH1 had a show called Behind the Music. And it started out as a wonderful documentary about artists who were big at one point and kind of fallen out of the limelight. And a lot of the stories were tragic. But I loved this show when it first started out. One of the first shows was about Andy Gibb. And being a fan of the show, I checked it out. And I was crying at the end of the show because he was the definition of a shooting star. He was popular for a few years, but he also loved to live the life. And that life cost him in the end. He had a huge career for about 3 years. He was on Solid Gold as a host. I watched Solid Gold during that time. I was about 10 or 11 years old. He was acting he was part of a group that was doing Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, I believe. But he couldn't stop with the substances. He dated Victoria Principal for about 8 months when Victoria Principal was white hot in popularity on the show Dallas.
Yes.
He had the world at his feet. And then it all went away because he became unreliable because of what he liked to do outside of his work. The episode was 20 minutes of the high and 40 minutes of the slow drop. He died at 30. He died when I was 11th grade. He lived from
too young.
1958 to 1988. But I mean, if you saw this guy, he had charisma. He had talent. He was a very handsome man too. And the life got to him. And so like I said, I cried at the end. I bought this CD. I bought the CD the next week. This was probably in the late 90s.
So sonically, would you say it's similar to the Bee Gees in that wheelhouse? If people were wanting to purchase it?
Yes. So his music is similar. Not maybe as many as the harmonies, but he rocked a little harder, I think, on some of these songs. I think Time is Time, which is the second to last song on here, is a great rock song, and it went to number 50 in the US. And this is all chronological, by the way. It hits all, I think it hits all 12 of his 11. I think it hits all of his top 40 hits and a couple deep cuts in here. Because the title track After Dark and the title track of Flowing Rivers. Yes, this is a great album. I mean, not just from the story I just told, but there's just a lot of great songs on here, and I think they've really held up. Our Love Don't Throw It All Away does sound a lot like a tender ballad from the Bee Gees, especially the harmonies at the end. I think that's Barry Gibb singing at the end there, and I mean, you do hear a lot of splashes of Barry on here, because Barry was. We could do a whole show about Barry Gibb, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and I'm a huge defender of the Bee Gees, so I think they're iconic, legendary, and
Barry Gibb, in my opinion, one of the most talented musicians. Period. I mean, you're talking about how you have a triple threat with Suzi Quatro. Look at Barry Gibb, and just with his production and
songwriter, producer, musician, amazing, and
fantastic singer. You hear those falsettos, you know it's him. I mean,
and even check out their 60s stuff before the falsetto.
Exactly,
great pop songs. You know, late 60s, early 70s.
No doubt.
Well, that's an interesting choice. I know nothing about Andy Gibb. I'll plead the fifth, but you've sort of made me want to listen. I think I've heard that You Are My Everything, maybe once or twice, but I don't even know the song title. But I don't know anything about Andy. But thank you for introducing that to the audience and to me. That's great.
You're welcome, Peter.
My next one was a bit of a supergroup, which was a merging between Duran Duran and the band Chic. And I'm talking about 1985, The Power Station. So you might say, really? Were they bigger in the US and the UK? Okay. They charted in the UK very high, but they sold much more copies in the US. So this album went to UK 12, but in the US it went number 6. And it's probably arguable that Duran Duran were even bigger in the US than the UK. It was a bit of Beatlemania for about 3 to 4 years. This had 2 top 10 hits. So it had the, Get It On and Some Like It Hot. I love the album cover. If you want to put an album cover that summarizes the 80s and that neon, I think this really sums it up. They're the guys. So you've got Robert Palmer, you've got John Taylor, Andy Taylor, and you've got Tony Thompson on the drums playing his, John Bonham meets funky Chic. I think it's a great album, and it gets kind of ignored and forgotten. This is where Duran Duran, the 2 members, wanted to get into play a little bit of Led Zeppelin rock. Production is really spick. The drums, they're very sort of, it's kind of mechanical. the sound, there's space between the kick drums and the snare. It's really, I don't know if it's been super processed, but it's built for the dance floor, but at the same time it rocks. John Taylor's bass lines just bubble all the way through, and he's always been my vote, other than Simon Le Bon, the most valuable musical player in that Duran Duran. His bass lines are to die for. The whole bottom end actually of Duran Duran has been very strong, but on this album where he's with Bernard Edwards or Tony Thompson, is just absolutely sublime. But the songs on the album, it's got 8 tracks: Get It On, Some Like It Hot, Murderous, Lonely Tonight. I think it's a killer, and it really sort of pushed the career of Robert Palmer. He left the band. They only did one live performance on Saturday Night Live, but they didn't tour with Robert Palmer. Michael DeBar's took over. Michael DeBar's of Detective and Silverhead, and Miami Vice and MacGyver. He was an actor as well, but he was the lead singer. So, and they played Live Aid, and you'll see it wasn't Robert Palmer, but Robert Palmer went on to, further stardom with Simply Irresistible and Addicted to Love. And I've been listening to those albums, and they've actually aged well. In the day, those 2 songs were just played to death, John.
Oh, yeah.
Those actual albums, have really sort of sonically are quite interesting, and the video clips are iconic. But I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but this is the sweet spot. This is the album, but this was much bigger in the US and UK. There you go. That's more of the lads. Power Station.
Wonderful choice. It's one of the best albums I don't own. But it is. It's one of those albums that was always now you know what the thing is. This is gonna be the show that makes me buy the album. It's one of those ones that was always, it was one I was always
bubbling under sort of thing. I'm got to get it one day sort of thing. But but the production on the album, I think Bernard Edwards does most of the production. He does so spick. The instrumentation is just so precise, and the drum sound is just, you can see it's really been mastered for the dance floor and for the rockers. So it's a perfect blend of rock and dance funk. Absolutely.
Yeah, they got, for about a good year or two, that album got played really heavy. And the videos were all over MTV. Communication, I believe, was another great song off that album, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
That was a top, I think that hit number 33 in the United States.
Yes. Still in Your Heart, Harvest for the World. But any band that gets a Mark Bolan song or a T-Rex into, published consciousness again, does all right with me. So T-Rex had his only hit in the US in the 70s, and here it comes again in the 80s.
Yep. Exactly.
All right.
Mark Bolan's great with me, man. I mean,
I know.
Wonderful band.
Yeah.
Great choice. All right, now we're going to go into the 90s. Okay, this band, in most countries, including the United States, where they were from, they're mostly known as a one-hit wonder. They had a #1 song called To Be With You. Was #1 in at least 10 countries that I was able to research. This isn't the album with that song. That album was their second album, and now they're I Feel So Silly because it's escaping me right now. But this is their third album, and the band I'm talking about, and there's so much talent in this band, it's insane, is Mr. Big. This is their third album, Bump Ahead. This had the hit Wild World, which was a cover of the Cat Stevens song. That went to number 28 in the US. To Be With You, the song that I mentioned, was on their second album. Talent across the board. Eric Martin, wonderful singer. Billy Sheehan, fantastic bass player who's played with so many artists.
Yep.
The late Pat Torpey on drums, and Paul Gilbert, wonderful guitar player. In Japan, huge. What happened in the United States, and I think this happens with a lot of bands that have a hit on the adult contemporary charts. When they do that, people, I think the record companies start to push more towards that adult contemporary market. And they don't get pushed more towards the rock market. Their self-titled debut was a very rockin' album. They hit with To Be With You from their second album. And then on this album, which was Bump Ahead, there are some good rockers on here, but there are more songs that are more melodic and sound like they would be great on adult contemporary radio, like Promise Her the Moon, Ain't Seen Love Like That, songs like that. Well, so their star had fallen by their third album, Bump Ahead. This is that album right here. This only went to number 82 in the US. Their fourth album did not chart. But in Japan, it went to number 1.
Huge.
And all through the 90s, whether it was a studio album or a live album, they kept getting massive returns in Japan. 6 top 10 singles in Japan. They had one in the US, and then they had a top 20 in Just Take My Heart. They had 1 platinum album, which was their second album. In Japan, 3 albums went platinum, 10 went gold. They were just so huge.
Yeah.
In Japan.
Well, you can't overstate the how Japan was a prop to a lot of metal or hard rock AOR bands.
It's crazy how, I mean, I remember when this was going on that that fourth album, Hey Man, hit 1, and my friend had it. He didn't do anything here.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Supergroup for the United States.
Absolutely. Isn't it funny, like AOR didn't really sort of translate in the UK, did it? So I know that's probably a topic for another day. I was just thinking when you were talking about Mr. Big that there are certain sort of musical genres that were very confined within that territory, and it sort of didn't really translate, but the Japan market just lapped it up.
Yeah. But yeah.
All right. That's a good pick. That's a good example. All right. This band formed in 1971. However, they started to hit their straps or become commercially known in the late 70s and early 80s. Their first big hit was in Australia with a single that went to number 7. A couple of albums later, they had a couple of hits in America, but this is sort of an illustration of how a territory broke an act before their homeland. And I'm talking about Martha Davis and the Motels.
Oh, nice.
This is off the first album, The Motels. And the song in question was Total Control. That went to number 7. One of those... this band I love. I think this is a great album. I played it last night again just to sort of validate my opinion. I've got so many Motels albums. I just pulled out a couple. There's more. I think Martha Davis is just a great front woman. She's sexy, sultry. Her personality is out there. Well-crafted songs. But Total Control is just probably their masterpiece on that album. It's so spare emotionally. You've got that really slow metronomic guitar, bass, drums, And then it comes to this really divine saxophone solo. It's Sex on a Stick with her vocals.
Mhm.
You look at the film clip and she's got this cigarette and you see the smoke. It's just so atmospheric. And there was a show in Australia called Countdown, and we were championing this song. And I single-handedly, well, I think we put our hand up. We actually probably broke the Motels worldwide, and they got noticed more. I mean, they had subsequent hits in America, Only the Lonely or Take the L Out of Lover and It's Over. What a clever song title.
Yeah.
They were well known, but it was this album. I mean, they were signed to Capitol, which is a blue chip record label. And I would put this up against any new wave act at that particular time, whether it's the Go-Go's in America or Missing Persons. Probably came a little bit later, but this is right up there. It's high quality. It's a great album, The Motels, from 1979, and check it out, Total Control. Just a little stats. I don't think it even charted in America. So it went to number 7 in Australia, and The Motels. There you go. To show that again, Martha Davis. She's still going strong. She's in her 70s. She's got a completely different band. It's Martha Davis and the Motels.
Mhm.
But she's a dynamo, and I think she plays Australia every 5 or 6 years and has a following. And just one of those bands that we really took to the heart and became famous over here before they were known over in America.
I never knew they hit in Australia first.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Total Control song?
I'm actually not.
Listen to it after the show. Put a comment down. I'd like to get your views on it. It's a great song.
Really?
It's just, and it's even been used in ads, commercials over here. It's just something. It's just a particular song that we took to our hearts. Slow, sexy, brooding. It's about her, sort of a relationship she had and how she just completely lost her mind. But it's just such a compelling 3 or 4 minutes of pop new wave. Check it out.
Excellent. Awesome choice. One thing I got to ask you, was there sax on those early albums?
A little bit, yes, sax.
Okay.
But on that song, it's got the sax solos just, yeah.
Nice.
You don't hear much sax in music anymore. That was very prevalent in the 80s. I love the old, I think horn arrangements and sax is something that I kind of miss in a lot of modern rock and pop music. And, I think it was that era of the 1979 to the mid 80s where there was so many good rock albums that were put out and had great horn arrangements. But now it's sort of gone. It's a bit redundant. You don't hear it anymore. Anyway, enough of my rant. What's your next one?
Excellent choice. Okay. I'm going to go with a band who they bubbled under in the late 90s through the 2000s in the United States. This band is from Illinois in the United States. However, they were definitely bigger in the UK. None of their albums certified in the United States, but they had 3 top 40 albums in the UK and 2 went gold. They had 8 top 40 hits in the UK, none in the United States, but they had 2 that were in the top 40 on the US alternative charts. This is a band that does a lot of genre hopping too. This is the Dandy Warhols. And this is their 2005 album, Auditorium or the Warlords of Mars. And they were a band, they were with Capitol, just like the Motels were. They had these, if you were like coming of age then, they had these popular songs that never got on the top 40 radio stations or anything like that, but on alternative stations, college stations, you heard the wonderful Bohemian Like You, which was their biggest hit in the UK at number 5. It should have been a number 5 all over the world, but it was just this great song that if you were really into music, you knew it, but the masses didn't know it. Other great songs they had, other great singles they had. We Used to Be Friends. Now, If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth. One thing they're known for in the States is a documentary they did called Dig. And I have it. I should have brought it out, but it was basically following them and a band that they were friends with called the Brian Jonestown Massacre. And it basically followed those bands for 6 years. And Anton Newcomb, who's the leader of Brian Jonestown Massacre, and Courtney Taylor Taylor, who's the leader of Dandy Warhols, they have this love-hate relationship. You Were the Last Dandy on Earth. That was the song that Anton Newcomb wrote as a response to the Dandy Warhols writing Not If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth. So they had this competition among them.
Yeah.
And the Dandy Warhols were on Capitol, and Brian Jonestown Massacre never got on the major, but they had a lot of credibility. They sounded like the 1960s, but it sounded like the 60s, but it was fresh. Whereas the Dandy Warhols, one thing that I think held them back was you didn't really know who they were because they'd have songs from different genres throughout the albums even. I mean, this album here, it's bookended by 2 songs that are very long and they kind of drag. But then you have these great songs like Down Like Disco and Smoke It and Holding Me Up, which are just catchy as sin. And they never, in my opinion, never really put it together for a full album, but they had a lot of great songs. But again, in the US, they were a cult band, and they still are a cult band. They're still around. So is the Brian Jonestown Massacre. But in the UK, they were definitely a more popular band. That's my number 5, the Dandy Warhols.
Well done. Well done. I actually have seen them about a month ago. They supported the Hoodoo Gurus in a tour. And first time I saw the Dandies, they played a 70-minute set. They played some of their old hits, but the thing that I appreciate, they were very uncompromising. They played a lot of their more recent tracks, and they let the songs breathe. It sounded a little bit proggy. There's a lot of feedback. It was experimental, and I appreciate it because a lot of people that would have seen them would have expected a greatest hits, but they just did what they wanted to do and for themselves. And that may be slightly controversial, but to my listening, I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. They did play a lot of the old songs like A Bohemian Like You. And I'll have to say, Dandy Warhols had a bit of a following in Australia. I think they played the Big Day Out festivals, but in the 90s, they were quite a big, and quite a few of their albums, I think, went top 10, top 20 and had a following. So that sort of subscribes to another territory, which are bigger than the Homeland. But I saw them a month ago, and at the end of the concert, I went to my wife and I said, that's one band I'm definitely going to explore their discography, because I think I had the cassette of the Bohemian, but I need to explore much more of their other catalogue. But I was really impressed. And as I said, they played a set which had a lot of, was very experimental. My friend who went with me thought it was boring. But anyway, Critics Corner, I liked it. Right. I'm going to explore it. But thanks for that. That really, that summed that up perfectly. Yeah. All right. Well, we're getting to the home run of the last and maybe a few honourable mentions. This band, way, way bigger in the UK and Australia than America, massively. It to the ratio of about 100-1. I'm talking about the Scissor Sisters and their self-titled debut. I'll put up my hand because I'll put an insert of the album. I couldn't find the CD. I have got it, but their self-titled debut of 2004. How would I describe them? I would describe them as glam rock, disco, dance, funk, They've got it all. They've got a very charismatic lead singer in Jake Shears. They're like a ragtag of all these different sort of personalities, but they're compelling to watch. I've seen them a couple of times live. This album was uber huge in the UK. Just to illustrate, it went 9 times platinum. Didn't even reach gold in Australia, in the US. So it only sold 266,000 copies in the US, but 9 times platinum in the UK.
Wow.
Some of their songs sound like early Elton John, like Take Your Mama. That's got that honky tonk piano. And I think it inspired Elton that for his subsequent albums, he even said in interviews, I heard the Scissor Sisters album and it inspired me to get back to the, playing music like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and that honky tonk piano. They do an amazing version of Comfortably Numb. It's like an electro disco version of it. And if you like cover songs that really turn things on its head, that is the song. I love it. Now, a lot of those traditional prog people that love Comfortably Numb may not like it, but I love it. I think it's just great. Laura, that's a fantastic song. It even sort of reminds me of a little bit of Supertramp. If you like Supertramp and you love the pop confections and the beautiful harmonies and the melody, the infectious hooks of Supertramp, this album's for you. But UK number 1, US 102.
Wow.
So there you go. Their subsequent albums another case study of the debut was like a pow, but every single album they did subsequent was not quite as good and didn't commercially do as well, and they lost their way. I think they're defunct. Jake Shears may be a solo artist, but there you go. Case study. Probably didn't make it in the US because maybe too camp, but in the UK loved it, and I love it, and yeah, that's my example. Scissor Sisters.
Nice. You gotta check them out. I actually never heard of them.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
I've met a few folk from America, like music fans, and we talk about stuff. And I always mention the Scissor Sisters, and they go, "Who?"
Yeah.
And they're just so huge over here, and they're American. And it's just an example that just completely unknown, but in other territories, huge. So. Nice. You got a couple of honorable mentions?
I got one. And as soon as I say who I'm sending this out to, another member of the Contrarians, you'll know who I'm talking about. It's for John Clauser. Wasp. Until I did some research for this show, I didn't realize how much bigger they were in the UK than they were in their native homeland in Los Angeles, California, United States. United States, I grew up listening to Wasp, so I can rattle off the statistics. They had 2 gold albums with the self-titled debut LP and The Last Command. And they also had 2 gold albums in the UK. I believe they were, let's say, The Last Command, The Headless Children. The Headless Children charted in the top 50 in the United States. It yet hasn't been certified gold. It probably is gold. It just yet to be certified. Now, singles-wise, they never sniffed the Hot 100 in the United States. But in the UK, they had 7 top 40 singles. They had 3 top 40 singles just off this album. This is 1989's The Headless Children. On this album, The Real Me, Mean Man, and Forever Free all hit the top 40. They had 14 top, I think they had like maybe 20, maybe more than 14, maybe more like 20 songs they hit the Hot 100 in the UK.
Knock me down with a feather.
Yeah. 14 songs. They have their own rock charts in the UK. 14 songs hit the top 6.
Mm.
They never hit on the AOR charts here. They never hit on the Hot 100. They were a video and a album band in the United States. They were close, but they never quite broke through. They've had a cult following. They're going to be touring. They're actually out touring right now. I'll see them in a couple of weeks.
Good stuff. They're touring. They're going to be, I think, doing a worldwide tour. It's
they are
40 years. Look, that's a really good pick. Their first album definitely had a little bit of heat for a little while, and I think it did crawl up to either gold status from memory. But in the UK, I was aware that they did trouble the charts in all the single charts, but I wasn't aware so many. That's a really interesting case study. So obviously, Blackie and his Rogue of Rascals did appeal to the UK Donington audience, so to speak. So, or the Kerrang readers.
The Kerrang,
I know Kerrang really pushed them, and
Kerrang did push them. That's true.
really hard. So that went in spades. I've got a couple of very, very brief ones. The Gossip. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're a band out of America. I would describe them as a post-punk garage rock band. They had a hit in the UK called Standing in the Way of Control. This is not the album, but that went to number 7. The Gossip is fronted by Beth Ditto. The band is defunct. They split out in 2016, but the single of Standing in the Way of Control went to number 7, and the album went to number 22. And in America, it charted nowhere. Pink, that's another artist. I know she does really well in America, but in Australia, she's like, she could take over Australia, could be the Prime Minister.
Wow.
She, it's just, I think she's got the record for consecutive sold out concerts at a particular venue in Australia, but she's just uber huge over here. And some examples, they're not in my wheelhouse. I think from an Australian perspective, Air Supply, they were yacht rock. They probably are. I think if you think of yacht rock, you think of Air Supply. They had a couple of top 10s, but in America, they were huge. Men at Work is another one off the top of my head. Yeah, they had a couple of number 1s in Australia, and they were sort of, reasonably successful. But in America, those first 2 albums were sort of multi-platinum. They were playing stadiums. And it was really funny to think that like a couple of years earlier, they were playing the pubs in Victoria or Melbourne, Victoria, and then suddenly they're headlining stadiums in America. So that's an example of bigger in the homeland, but that's just off to the top of my head. You got any others that you can think of off the top of your head, or?
Well, I know with that Men at Work album, that was number 1 for 15 weeks in the United States.
Phenomenal.
Business as usual.
Phenomenal.
Insane. Those hits were huge. I can't really. What about, maybe you could educate me here. Kylie Minogue.
Yes. Bigger in the UK than Australia. Big in Australia, much bigger in the UK. And it's all because she was on a show called Neighbours, which was a soap. And the UK just loved that show. So, yeah, that's a good example. Well done.
Thanks. Just popped in my head.
Yeah.
Nice.
Great doing a show with you, John. I think we covered some really good examples where you've got an artist that has just been much bigger overseas than the homeland. So we'll do another show very shortly. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. We'll do a show very shortly. And John, as always, thank you for being my guest, and we'll catch up soon. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.